Your Steve Jones Show podcast is loading now. The Steve Jones Show podcast is sponsored by Sunbury Motors, North 4th Street in Sunbury, and Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf.
One of the best ever, and it's always great to have him on the show. Ray Didinger. Welcome, Ray. It's always a pleasure. I hope you are well, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Steve. Good to be with you again.
All right. So the league is designed to have these successes and dips. You get draft picks and last place schedules and things like that. The Eagles have taken advantage of some of this stuff. As you've watched it play out, was there anything along the way that with this group that it surprised you?
Yeah, the turnaround. You know, the fact that at 2-5, things look pretty bleak with this team, especially when you had a rookie head coach that no one really knew anything about coming in. At 2-5 and coming off a couple of really bad losses, I mean, there were a lot of people that didn't even think Nick Sirriani was going to finish the year. I mean, they were talking about, when's Jeff Lurie going to admit this was a terrible mistake, and this guy is in over his head, and, you know, okay, which of the assistant coaches are you going to promote to finish out the season? I mean, those conversations were actually taking place. So to think that here you are at 9-7, already locked up a playoff position, and looking ahead to the postseason is pretty remarkable turnaround. It really is when you consider, you know, Nick Sirriani went from being a guy that looked like he had one foot out the door to being a guy that's now being talked about as maybe coach of the year.
Right. You and I both know, just from personal experience, everybody grows into jobs, right?
Sure.
They grow into jobs. So if we've watched now Nick Sirriani, where have we seen some of that growth in him?
Well, clearly the redesign of the offense. I mean, that was pretty remarkable what he did. I mean, through the first part of the season, the offense is his baby, really, and it just seemed to have no direction. First part of the season, I mean, they had the one Monday night game they played down in Dallas, where the running backs actually carried the ball 3 times in the entire game.
Yeah,
it was just ridiculous. I mean, the play calling was just. You couldn't imagine what he was thinking. I mean, at the end of the game, then somebody pointed out that the running backs had carried the ball 3 times, and he looked sort of stunned. And then he spent the rest of the week saying, yeah, you know, looking back on that, maybe I should have run the ball a little more. And so that was the kind of thing I said, oh, man, is this guy in over his head? But then, you know, when they got to 2-5, and it was obvious that the young quarterback was a little overwhelmed by what he was being asked to do, which was basically everything, he decided, you know what? You know, the strength of our team really kind of is the offensive line. You know, we're really good up front. So, you know, why don't we just start? Hey, here's an idea. Why don't we start running the ball? You know, why don't we start strapping it onto the backs of these offensive linemen? We got some pretty good backs here. We got a really good offensive line. Why don't we start running the ball? And you know, maybe we can kind of win games that way, and in the process, take some of the pressure off our young quarterback. And bingo, that change in philosophy, along with, and, you know, admittedly, you got to admit, the schedule became a lot easier on the back end. But those two things together took this team from nowhere to now into the playoffs.
All right, so let's get into the young quarterback for a moment. We had a 4-game sample size with him last year. As time has gone, what have you liked about him, and where are there areas needed for growth?
Well, he's certainly improved, but that's, you know, I mean, you could say that throughout his whole career. I mean, when we first saw him playing at Alabama, he really looked like a running back playing quarterback. I mean,
yes.
His passing, his mechanics were just so far out of whack that you just wondered if he could ever really be a functional quarterback. But then when he left Alabama and he went to Oklahoma, he clearly was working at it because he got better. And then he came to the NFL, and 2 years in, he's continuing to work at it, and he's getting better still. Now he's still not a picture perfect quarterback. He's still not a thread the needle passer, really, but he's a pretty dynamic runner. And part of the reason why the running game has worked so well is that he's a runner that you have to account for as a defender. I mean, it's not just a matter of the running backs you have to account for. I mean, every time they line up, you have to account for him as a potential runner, and it makes this team a very tough team to defend. Now, what he has to be. He just has to continue developing as a quarterback. But you saw this year that when they went through this offensive transition, and again, I give Sirriani a lot of credit for seeing what had to be done and implementing it on the fly, which is a hard thing to do in the NFL, but he did it. Once they did that, and it didn't all fall on Hurts to just do everything out of the shotgun, but they were able to run a lot of play action stuff. All of a sudden, you began to see him settle in the pocket and get better mechanics and become a much better passer. And these the last 3 or 4 games, since he had a really bad game up in New York, the game where he turned it over, threw 3 interceptions,
right.
That was really bad, and came out of that with an injury, missed a game. And then, Gardner Minshew came in and actually had a good game against the Jets, and there were a lot of people that said that the Eagles should make a quarterback change. and Sirianni said, no, we're going to go back to Hurts. And he's come back, and since then, he's completed almost 67% of his passes and only thrown 1 interception. So, he's really improving as a passer. He's not, he's still got a ways to go, but he's certainly improved from where he was when we saw him in Tuscaloosa.
They also helped themselves in the draft when they got Devontae Smith.
Yep.
Yeah, it's one thing to see a guy on TV, but then you finally get to see him in practical application in person. What has impressed you about Devontae Smith?
Everything.
Yeah,
Everything.
I agree.
I've often said I can't remember the last time I was this excited about an Eagles draft pick. I think when they, and I give the general manager Howie Roseman credit. He pulled off the trade on draft night that he jumped ahead of the Giants because the Giants were all set to take Devontae Smith. They were all in on Devontae Smith, and Howie Roseman and the Eagles wanted him too, and they made the trade with the Cowboys. That not often you make trades within your division, but they traded with the Cowboys to jump ahead of the Giants, and they got Devontae Smith, and boy, has he made a difference. The last couple of years. The receiver corps here just weren't good enough. They just couldn't get open. They weren't reliable catching the ball. They were generating very, very little out of the passing game. And even though they had invested some high draft picks in it, some of the guys just hadn't developed really. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside has given them nothing. Jalen Reagor, last year's first pick, has basically given them nothing. John Hightower is a kid that they drafted. They had some high hopes for. He's a practice squad guy now. They had invested all this capital in draft and wide receivers, and none of them was producing. So there was some people were sort of rolling their eyes and saying, "Really, you're going to use the first pick on another wide receiver, given your track record?" But they recognized that this guy, he wasn't like the other guys. This guy came out of college as a very polished product. If anybody that watched him play at Alabama, and we all saw them, they were on TV every week, so you saw it. He was an NFL player before he ever came out of college.
Right.
He was a Sunday player playing on Saturdays, and if you watched him play, you knew that. So he hit the ground running here in Philadelphia, and he has really, really added a lot to this passing game. That combined with the development of Dallas Goedert as a really good tight end who can both block and catch the 3rd-yard down pass and also go down the seam and catch the big play. They've got the makings, not a complete passing game, but they got the makings of a very good one.
It's interesting because, Alabama's going to play Georgia again on Monday night. People forget that when Tua threw the touchdown pass, it was Devontae Smith that caught it that won the game as a freshman. People seem to forget that. What's interesting about him, Ray? National championship game last year, they're playing Ohio State. They kept lining up Smith in the slot. And Ohio State never touched him off the line of scrimmage. I was like, you got to jam this guy. Now he gets to the NFL where they got the 5-yard contact rule. Ray, that first step off the line of scrimmage, he's so impressive. They still don't get contact with him.
No, they don't. And, Steve, that was I kept telling people, I said, this kid's a star. He is. He just is. You can just see it. And, what everybody was saying was, no, he's 115 pounds. He's going to come to the NFL, and he's not going to be able to get off the line of scrimmage, and he's going to get hurt. And, I said, no, if you saw him play in college, number one, you never lay a glove on him at the line of scrimmage. You don't.
Yeah.
And NFL defensive backs, they're bigger, they're stronger, they're better, but they still haven't had to deal with a guy like this. And he is so good at getting off the line of scrimmage. And once he gets down the field, the way he can stem a route and create separation, I mean, you saw that every week in college, and he's been able to do the same thing here in the NFL. And even though he is slight, I mean, there's no question, but he's not short. I mean, he's over 6 feet tall, and he's got long arms, so he's got a wide catch range. It's more than people think. And he looks skinny, but he's a guy that never takes the big hit. He's kind of got the comparison that I make is he reminds me a lot of Marvin Harrison.
Yes.
In Harrison, he's a smallish kind of guy, but he never took the big hit. He always kind of knew when to get out of bounds. He always kind of knew when to curl up and get under the defender. He caught the ball and he would catch it in traffic from time to time, but he just had that ability to sort of slip and slide and never take the big kill shot. And as a result, I mean, he's been able to play, and just every week he just seems to get better. And you see the chemistry, the rapport, which actually these guys played together at Alabama, so it's not like they were starting from nowhere. But you see it just getting better and better by the week. And I really do believe that his career is only going to go up from here.
And we're seeing the upward trajectory of Goddard at tight end. Zach Ertz is now with Arizona. What makes Goddard a good NFL tight end in your mind, Ray?
He can pretty much do everything you want him to do. I mean, the one quality that nobody talks nearly enough about is his blocking. He's a very good blocker. I mean, part of the reason why this team has been able to run the ball and run it on the edges as well as they have is because Goddard is a very effective blocker. So that's one part of it. But he can really run routes. He's a little Ertz-like in his ability to come off the line of scrimmage and run a really crisp route. And catch the ball. And he's also got deceptive speed. I mean, for a big man, I mean, you look at his average yards per catch, it's over 15, it's almost 16 yards per catch, which is a lot for a tight end. So he can go down the seam, he can catch that ball. He can take on single coverage and lose it on a post corner. I mean, he can run routes like a wide receiver, but he can do the physical dirty work that you need a tight end to do. The only problem with him, and this is just something he's just going to have to work through, is he does drop the ball some. I mean, he has, almost every game he's kind of got like one drop that you say, oh, geez, there was a big play. I mean, if he catches it, it's a big play. So, and it's just a matter of concentration. I mean, sometimes he's just kind of doing what a lot of receivers do, which is kind of looking over his shoulder, trying to figure out where he's going to run before he catches the ball, and it clanks off his hands. But once he kind of gets past that and gets into that habit where he just looks the ball into his hands, then he's going to be one of the elite guys. I mean, he's close to being that now, but if he just gets those drops out of his game, he's going to be mentioned with the very best, I think.
Yeah, that's what all those practices I saw with Miles Sanders. He'd have to work through that all the time. All right, so here's the last one I'll ask. The running inside joke that Jack Ham and I have when we were in the practice field is that we'll go over to watch the defense, and Jack will look at me and he'll say, well, Steve, now this is where the game's won, Right. So let's talk about that side of the ball because obviously defense travels, all right, running game travels. So why have the Eagles played better defense this year? Well,
their run defense is pretty good. I mean, if you look at the average yards they're giving up per carry, they're definitely top 10. Overall, I mean, their defensive ranking is pretty high. I mean, they're a top 10 defense. I'll tell you, Steve, I think that's a little misleading. I don't think they're quite that good. Right. I think that kind of the numbers, when you look at them, you say, geez, wow, that's an elite defense. But, a lot of it is the way things have played out. I mean, the teams that played against, the quarterbacks that played against. I mean, that you can't. When you say that, people say you're reaching to criticize and you're being nitpicky, and I don't really think so. I mean, if you look back over the whole season, I've seen what good quarterbacks have done to this defense. I've seen the Bradys, I've seen the Carrs, I've seen the Mahomeses, I've seen the Prescotts. I mean, those guys were completing 80%, literally 80% of their passes against this defense.
Yes.
So, I mean, have they improved? Yeah, they've improved, but not that much. And that's the one sort of pump the brakes thing that I've been saying to the fan base here is that, okay, you've had this really nice run against, the Garrett Gilberts and Jake Fromms and all of those things. But, if you're going to go to the postseason, and they are now, you're going to be running up against those good quarterbacks again. And that's where the rubber meets the road. We'll see how they do then. they're not a particularly good pass rushing team. They're not very high in takeaways. And those are the things that separate teams when you get to the postseason. Those are the things you got to be able to get pressure on the quarterback, especially in the fourth quarter, and you got to win the giveaway takeaway battle if you want to advance in the postseason. So, I give them all the credit in the world for overcoming a bad start and getting themselves into the postseason. I mean, that was no small accomplishment, but to get to the postseason and survive, that's going to, now we're talking about a whole different ball game here, and we'll see. Defensively, I just don't know if they're ready to play with the big boys yet.
And that's what we're going to find out because the big boys all have quarterbacks.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like when the best quarterback you've beaten so far maybe is Teddy Bridgewater?
No, maybe Matt Ryan.
Matt Ryan, okay, yeah, I'll agree with Matt Ryan. Yeah,
but we're going back to week one and saying that.
Yeah,
but I would say that he's probably the best quarterback you beat. And at that point, Atlanta was a pitiful, sorry excuse for a team. I mean, they really hadn't worked Pitts into the offense yet, and that was a pretty easy W for them. But yeah, you look at the quarterbacks they've beaten, and it's definitely a bottom tier group.
Yeah. Ray, always a pleasure. Thanks so much. Really appreciate you very much.
Always a pleasure, Steve. Talk to you
Thanks.
anytime. Take care now.
You bet.
All right. Bye-bye.